"You're not invited," my daughter screamed and ordered security to throw me out of her wedding. The two guards looked at each other, burst out laughing, and said, "Ma'am, this gentleman is the owner of the restaurant." She went white as a ghost, and I had only just walked in, because my own daughter planned her wedding without me in my restaurant, and thought I'd just leave quietly. Now she'll find out what happens when you betray the wrong man. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The living room felt smaller than usual when Rebecca walked in that Tuesday evening. Maybe it was the way she held herself, spine rigid, shoulders back, like she was bracing for something unpleasant. Or maybe it was the man trailing behind her, wearing a smile that reminded me of a shark circling prey. "Dad, we need to talk." Rebecca's voice had that flat, corporate tone she'd picked up somewhere in the last 6 months. Not the warm voice that used to call me at midnight, excited about a new recipe she'd tried. "Of course, honey. Sit down, both of you." I gestured to the couch, already feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same knot I'd been ignoring for months now. Tracy Holmes, my daughter's boyfriend, settled into my armchair like he owned it. He'd never asked if he could sit there. Never asked much of anything, really. Just took. "So," Rebecca perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. "Tracy and I have some news." I leaned forward, forcing a smile. "Good news, I hope." "We're getting married." She said it like she was announcing a dental appointment. 3 weeks from now, April 15th. For a moment, I couldn't process it. 3 weeks? I opened my mouth to congratulate her, to stand up and hug my little girl, but Tracy cut in before I could move. "It's going to be quite the affair," he said, that shark smile widening. "We've booked one of Charleston's most exclusive venues. Very high-end. You understand how these things are, Mr. Coleman. Certain standards to maintain." There was something in the way he said, "Mr. Coleman." Not warm, not familiar, like I was a stranger at a business meeting. I looked at Rebecca, waiting for her to jump in, to explain, to sound like herself, but she just nodded, staring at a spot on the carpet. That's wonderful," I managed. "Fast, but wonderful. Let me—" I stood up, arms already opening to embrace my daughter. "We appreciate your understanding of the situation." Tracy's voice sliced through the moment like a knife. He hadn't moved from the chair, hadn't even shifted. "It's going to be an intimate ceremony, just the closest people in our lives." Understanding? What situation? Rebecca finally looked up at me, and for just a second I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Shame? Then it was gone, replaced by that same corporate blankness. "The Holmes family has very specific traditions," she said. "It's important to Tracy that we respect them." "Of course, of course." I sat back down slowly, trying to read between the lines. "So 3 weeks. That doesn't give us much time to plan, does it? Should I call my sister? And what about—" "Actually, Dad, we've got everything handled." Rebecca's words came out rushed. "Tracy's mother has been incredible. She's arranged everything. The flowers, the catering, the—" "Your daughter's going to be stunning," Tracy interrupted again. This man had a real talent for talking over people. "Worth every penny we're spending. Though I'm sure you understand, Mr. Coleman, that weddings at this level require a certain financial commitment. Not everyone can appreciate the finer details." I felt my jaw tighten. There it was, that barely disguised condescension I'd been tasting every time this man opened his mouth. The implication that I, with my little restaurant job, couldn't possibly understand their world of country clubs and trust funds. "I'm sure it'll be beautiful," I said evenly. "Whatever makes Rebecca happy." "Exactly." Tracy stood up, checking his expensive watch. "We should get going, babe. Dinner reservation at 8. Rebecca jumped up like she'd been waiting for permission to leave. "Right. Yes." I walked them to the door, my mind spinning. Something was wrong. Very wrong. But I couldn't quite grab hold of what it was. "So, should I rent a tux, or is it more casual?" I asked, trying to sound light. "And where exactly is this venue?" Tracy's hand was already on the doorknob. "We'll send you all the details, Mr. Coleman. No need to worry about anything." "I'm not worried. I just—" "Good night, Dad." Rebecca kissed my cheek quickly, mechanically. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut with a finality that made my chest ache. I stood in the empty hallway, listening to Tracy's expensive car start up outside. The house felt cavernous suddenly, empty in a way it hadn't felt in years. Something Tracy had said kept echoing in my head. "We appreciate your understanding of the situation." And Rebecca's words, "just the closest people in our lives." The closest people. My hand was still raised from the hug Rebecca had dodged. I walked back into the living room and sank into my armchair, still warm from where Tracy had been sitting. On the coffee table, Rebecca had left a bridal magazine. I picked it up, flipped through pages of white dresses and elaborate cakes, and tried to remember the last time my daughter had looked me in the eye. The closest people in our lives. I set the magazine down carefully, precisely, like if I moved too fast, I might shatter something. Or maybe I'd shatter myself. Because suddenly, with horrible clarity, I understood what Tracy had meant by understanding the situation. They weren't going to invite me to the wedding, my own daughter's wedding, and she'd just sat in my living room, watching her fiancé deliver that message with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and she'd said nothing, done nothing, just nodded along like a puppet. I looked at my hands, these hands that had held her when she was born, taught her to ride a bike, bandaged her scraped knees, signed the check for her culinary school tuition. These hands that had built a life for us after her mother died. Who was that cold stranger in my living room tonight? And where was my daughter? Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan making lazy circles, and my mind kept circling too. Back, back, back through the last 6 months, looking for the moment everything changed. Had it always been there? Had I just been too blind to see it? I remembered Rebecca at 10 years old, standing on a step stool in the restaurant kitchen, her tongue poking out in concentration as she tried to flip a pancake. She'd been so proud when she finally got it right, and I'd framed that lopsided pancake like it was the Mona Lisa. It hung in my office for years. "I'm going to have a restaurant just like you, Daddy," she'd announced. I'd ruffled her hair. "Better than me, sweetheart. You'll be better than me." And she could have been. The girl had talent, natural instinct in the kitchen, creativity with flavors, the kind of palate you can't teach. When she got into the Charleston Culinary Institute, I'd been so proud I could barely speak at her acceptance dinner. I paid for all 4 years, $38,000 from the restaurant's profits, worth every penny to see her face light up when she talked about molecular gastronomy or the perfect béarnaise. Then she graduated, and nothing. She never worked in a kitchen, not once. Said she wanted to explore her options, that she wasn't sure the restaurant industry was right for her. I told her it was fine. Take your time. Find your passion. I never imagined her passion would be Tracy Holmes. He appeared 6 months ago. Rebecca brought him to Sunday dinner, my one guaranteed day with my daughter every week. He'd walked into my house like he was touring a museum of quaint poverty, touching nothing, his eyes skating over my mismatched furniture with barely concealed distaste. "So, Mr. Coleman," he'd said over my homemade lasagna, "Rebecca tells me you work in a restaurant?" "I do," I'd replied, not bothering to correct him. "Not yet. Interesting. Must be steady work." He'd smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm in finance myself, investment consulting. It's a different world, of course, but I imagine we both deal with people's futures in our own ways." The comparison was ridiculous. I'd bitten my tongue. That first dinner had set the pattern. Every subsequent visit, Tracy would drop little comments, observations about smart money and real estate opportunities, and how the service industry is fine for some people, but it's not exactly where wealth is built. Rebecca had started changing after that, slowly at first, missing our Sunday dinners occasionally, her calls coming less frequently. When she did visit, she talked about Tracy's world, the charity galas, the networking events, the important people she was meeting. "Tracy says I should think about my future more seriously," she told me one evening about 3 months ago. "He says I have so much potential that I'm not using." I'd wanted to ask, potential for what? To be someone's trophy? To forget where you came from? But I didn't. I just nodded and smiled and told her I was glad she was happy. Last month, she'd canceled our Sunday dinner for the 3rd week in a row. "Tracy's parents are having a dinner party," she'd explained over the phone. "It's really important I be there. You understand, right, Dad?" I'd understood. I'd understood that Tracy's parents ranked higher than her own father. And yesterday, sitting in my living room, watching Tracy orchestrate the conversation while Rebecca played along, I'd understood something else. We appreciate your understanding of the situation. The situation, the problem, the embarrassment. Me. I got out of bed around 3 in the morning and went downstairs. In my home office, I turned on the desk lamp and looked at the wall. There she was, Rebecca, through the years. Rebecca at the restaurant's grand opening, age 12, wearing the junior manager badge I'd made her. Rebecca at her culinary school graduation, diploma held high, her smile so bright it could light up the whole city. Rebecca last Christmas, laughing at something I'd said, her face unguarded and real. When had that light gone out? I picked up my phone, thought about calling her, asking her directly, "Am I invited to your wedding, Rebecca? Do I matter to you at all anymore?" But I knew what Tracy would say if he answered. Something about drama and stress and how I needed to respect their wishes. My daughter was getting married in 3 weeks, and I was fairly certain I wouldn't be there. The thought should have made me sad. And it did. There was a deep, aching sadness somewhere in my chest. But underneath that, something else was growing. Something harder, colder. I'd spent 6 months making excuses for her. 6 months telling myself she was just busy, just excited about her new relationship, just finding her own way. I'd been a fool. Rebecca wasn't finding her own way. She was letting Tracy Holmes map it out for her, and that map apparently didn't include her father. The girl I'd raised, the one who used to call me her best friend, who used to say she wanted to be just like me, had decided I wasn't good enough for her new life. I sat in that office until dawn broke, until the first light crept through the windows, until I heard the newspaper hit my front porch. And somewhere in those quiet hours, something shifted inside me. I couldn't change the past 6 months. I couldn't force my daughter to love me or respect me or remember who she used to be. But I could stop being a fool. I could stop pretending this was going to magically fix itself. And I could stop letting Tracy Holmes and his shark smile dictate how this story ended. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but as I sat there watching the sun rise over Charleston, I made myself a promise. If my daughter wanted to cut me out of her life, that was her choice, but she was going to have to look me in the eye and say it. No more polite evasions, no more having her fiancé deliver the message. If Rebecca didn't want me at her wedding, she was going to have to tell me herself, and then we'd see what happened next. I called Rebecca the next morning. My hand was steadier than I expected as I dialed her number, maybe because I'd spent all night preparing for this conversation, rehearsing it, steeling myself for whatever corporate speak excuse she'd deliver. "Dad?" she answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear traffic in the background, already out and about at 9 in the morning, too busy for her father, as usual. "Morning, honey." I kept my voice light, casual, like we were discussing Sunday dinner plans instead of her wedding. I was thinking about the ceremony. When exactly is it? I need to arrange my schedule at the restaurant, maybe buy a new suit. The pause that followed could have swallowed the whole city of Charleston. I listened to her breathe, listened to a car horn honk somewhere on her end, listened to my own heartbeat thundering in my ears while my daughter searched for words to tell me I wasn't welcome at her wedding. "Dad, Her voice came out strained, official, the same tone she'd probably used to fire an employee. "Tracy and I have decided to keep the ceremony very intimate, just his family and a few close friends. You know how these big weddings can be. Everything gets so formal and complicated." "Wait." I cut her off, surprised by how calm I sounded. "Are you telling me I'm not invited to my own daughter's wedding?" "Don't be dramatic." Now she sounded annoyed, like I was the one being unreasonable. Tracy explained that his family is very, traditional. It would be uncomfortable for everyone. We'll do a separate family dinner afterward, just the two of us. Quality time. Quality time. Like I was a client she was trying to placate with a consolation prize. Uncomfortable for who, Rebecca? Silence. Then, "I have to go, Dad. Please understand. This decision is already made." And she hung up. I sat in my office at Magnolia and Marsh, staring at the phone in my hand like it might offer some explanation for what had just happened. On the wall across from my desk hung a gallery of memories, Rebecca through the years. There she was at 12, standing in front of the restaurant on opening day, wearing the junior manager badge I'd made her as a joke. There she was at 18, accepting her culinary school diploma while I stood beside her, bursting with pride. And there was last year's Christmas photo, both of us laughing at something ridiculous I'd said about the turkey being architecturally sound. Who was that stranger on the phone? The one who'd just uninvited her father from the most important day of her life? I stood up and walked to the window overlooking King Street. Tourists were already out, snapping photos of the historic buildings, probably planning which restaurant to try for lunch. Some of them would end up here. Some of them would choose our wedding package for their own big day, never knowing the owner's daughter was too ashamed of him to let him attend hers. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read it 3 times. Each time the words rearranged themselves in my head, showing me what she was really saying. You're an embarrassment. Tracy's family is more important. Know your place. Something shifted in my chest. Not heartbreak this time. I'd felt that last night. This was different. Colder. Harder. I started thinking about the last 6 months with new eyes. All those canceled dinners. All those conversations where Rebecca talked about Tracy's world like it was some magical kingdom I could never understand. The way she'd started dressing differently, talking differently, even holding herself differently. Spine straight, shoulders back, like she was constantly being evaluated, like she was performing. And Tracy. That shark smile. Those little comments about smart investments and real opportunities, and how the service industry was fine for some people. I'd let it slide because I loved my daughter, because I wanted her to be happy, because I thought if I just gave her space, she'd come back to herself. What a fool I'd been. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years. Roger Stewart, private investigator. We'd met when he was looking into insurance fraud at a competing restaurant, and I'd helped him with some background information. He owed me a favor. Dennis Coleman, Roger's gravelly voice came through the speaker. Been a while. What can I do for you? I need information on someone, I said. Tracy Holmes, financial consultant, early 30s. Family money, old Charleston. Checking out your daughter's boyfriend? Roger had always been sharp. Fianc, I corrected it, and yes. Give me 3 days. I spent those 3 days watching, really watching. I drove past Tracy's office building downtown, all glass and steel and pretension. I looked him up online, scrolled through his perfectly curated social media presence. Photos at charity galas, photos at the yacht club, photos with his arm around Rebecca, her smile looking more plastic in each successive image. I noticed things I'd missed before. The way his eyes never quite reached his smile. The way he touched Rebecca, possessively like she was a prize he'd won. The way he posed in every photo, always angling for his best side. Everything was performance. Everything was calculated, and my daughter had bought the whole show. Roger called on the 3rd day. You sitting down? Should I be? Your future son-in-law is an interesting character. Publicly, he's a successful investment consultant. Privately, he's got 3 lawsuits from former clients for bad investment advice. Cost people serious money. We're talking 6 figures in losses. His family keeps settling quietly, keeping it out of the papers. I listened, my hand tightening around the phone. There's more, Roger continued. He's got a pattern. Targets young women with money, or access to money. Gets engaged quickly. 2 previous engagements that ended in settlements. The women signed NDAs, but I've got a source who says one of them called him a financial predator. He thinks Rebecca has money, I said quietly. Probably. Does she? No. Everything I have is tied up in the restaurant. There's no trust fund, no inheritance sitting around, just the business. Does he know that? I don't think Rebecca ever told him the details. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. She was probably too embarrassed about her father's little restaurant job. Roger was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do with this information? Good question. What was I going to do? I looked at the photos on my wall again. Rebecca at 10, flower in her hair. Rebecca at 16, proudly holding up her first perfectly plated dish. Rebecca at 22, hugging me after graduation, whispering, Thank you for everything, Dad. That girl was still in there somewhere, buried under Tracy's influence and his family's snobbery and her own misguided ambitions. But she'd made her choice. She'd looked me in the eye, or rather, couldn't look me in the eye, and told me I wasn't good enough for her new life. Dennis, Roger prompted. Send me everything you've got, I said. And Roger, keep this quiet. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time thinking, planning. The old Dennis would have confronted Rebecca directly, would have tried to talk sense into her, would have begged her to see what Tracy really was. But the old Dennis was gone. He'd died somewhere in that phone conversation, in that text message telling him not to make this harder. The new Dennis understood something important. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, and some truths have to be shown, not told. 2 days later, Carla Richardson walked into my office with her tablet. Carla had been my restaurant manager for 10 years, efficient, loyal, and blessed with the kind of organizational mind that could coordinate 5 weddings in one weekend without breaking a sweat. Dennis, we've got a big booking for May 3rd, she said, scrolling through her screen. Wedding. Holmes Coleman. Full package, 150 guests, $45,000. They've already put down the deposit. I'd just taken a sip of coffee. I nearly choked on it. What? I managed. Say that again? The names? Carla looked at me strangely. Holmes Coleman. Why? Something wrong? Something wrong. That was the understatement of the century. My own daughter had booked my restaurant. My restaurant. The one I'd built from the ground up. The one I'd poured 15 years and every cent I had into creating. She'd called, made a reservation, paid the full price, $45,000 that I would have happily gifted her, and never once mentioned that it was her wedding. She was going to get married in my building, surrounded by my staff, eating food prepared in my kitchen, and she didn't even want me there. The audacity was almost impressive. Dennis? Carla's face had gone pale. Coleman, wait. This is Rebecca, isn't it? I nodded, unable to speak. Carla looked back at her tablet, scrolling through the booking details. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something like anger. There's a special request here. They want 2 security guards hired for guest list management and prevention of uninvited attendees. They even provided a specific name of someone to keep out. She stopped. Her eyes met mine. Let me guess, I said quietly. Dennis Coleman. She nodded slowly, her face a mask of shock. For a moment, I just sat there, letting it sink in. My daughter hadn't just uninvited me from her wedding. She'd taken it a step further. She'd booked my own venue, paid my company $45,000, and hired security specifically to keep me out. It was almost funny. If it wasn't so completely devastating, it would have been hilarious. Then something strange happened. A calm settled over me, a cold, clear calm that felt like ice water in my veins. And I smiled. Carla looked alarmed. Dennis, are you okay? Carla, I said slowly, do they know who owns this restaurant? Her eyes widened as she understood. Rebecca never told him, did she? She grew up here. She used to help in the kitchen on weekends. She's been to 100 events in this building. I leaned back in my chair, my mind already turning. But I guess when you're ashamed of your father's work, you don't brag about him owning one of Charleston's premier wedding venues. What are you going to do? I looked at the booking on her screen. May 3rd, Saturday, 3 weeks away. I could cancel it. I had every right to refuse service, especially under these circumstances. But that would be too simple, too obvious. It would make me look petty, vindictive. It would let Tracy paint me as the unreasonable father who couldn't handle his daughter's happiness. No, if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Make sure everything is perfect, I said. I want this to be the best wedding we've ever hosted. Spare no expense. Use our premium flowers, our best menu options, everything. Carla stared at me. You're serious. Completely. And hire the security guards they requested. But Carla? I met her eyes. Make sure those guards understand exactly who signs their paychecks. A slow smile spread across her face. Oh, I see. Over the next week, I set things in motion. First, I called my lawyer, Philip Hunter. We'd worked together when I'd bought the restaurant, and he'd handled all my business documentation since. Philip, I need to restructure everything, I told him over lunch at a quiet bistro downtown. The restaurant, all my assets. I want them in an irrevocable trust with specific conditions. Philip set down his fork. What kind of conditions? The beneficiary, Rebecca, only receives access after a personal interview with me where I determine she's ready. If I decide she's not, or if she's being manipulated, everything goes to charity. And most importantly, any debts or legal judgments against family members cannot touch the trust assets. You're protecting her from her husband's potential legal problems, Philip said, understanding immediately. Future husband. Maybe. If the wedding happens. I smiled grimly. I've learned some interesting things about Tracy Holmes. 3 lawsuits from clients. A pattern of targeting women with money. His family has been quietly settling his mistakes for years. Philip whistled low, and Rebecca doesn't know. Rebecca thinks he's Prince Charming. She's so blinded by his world. The galas, the connections, the country club life, that she can't see she's just another Mark. So you're going to tell her. I'm going to show her, I corrected. There's a difference. The documents took 4 days to prepare and sign. Every asset I'd built over 15 years, now locked away where Tracy Holmes couldn't touch it, even if he tried. Even if he married Rebecca and somehow convinced her to let him manage her inheritance. The trust was airtight. While Philip worked on the legal side, I focused on May 3rd. I met with Carla daily, going over every detail of the wedding. The flowers, magnolias and marsh grass naturally, fitting our restaurant's name. The menu, a low-country feast that would make any Charleston native proud. The music, the decorations, the timeline. They want a string quartet during the ceremony, Carla said, checking her notes, and they've requested our premium champagne for the toast. Give them our best vintage, I said. I want every guest at that wedding to understand they're experiencing top-tier service. I also called Pastor Thomas Garrett, an old friend who I knew was officiating the ceremony. Thomas and I had known each other for 20 years, since back when I was just a line cook with dreams of opening my own place. Thomas, I need a favor, I said when we met for coffee. Anything, Dennis. What's going on? I explained the situation. Thomas's face went from confusion to shock, to something like sadness. Rebecca's shutting you out of her own wedding? He said quietly. That doesn't sound like the girl I remember. That girl is gone, I said, or maybe just buried. I'm hoping I can dig her back out. What do you need from me? Just be ready. On May 3rd, things might get complicated. Thomas studied me for a long moment. You're not going to do anything crazy, are you? Define crazy. I smiled without humor. I'm going to show up at my daughter's wedding, at my own restaurant. Is that crazy? When you put it that way, Thomas said slowly, it sounds perfectly reasonable. The day before the wedding, I went shopping. I'd been wearing the same 3 suits for years. Comfortable, practical, perfectly fine for restaurant management, but nothing special. I walked into Berlin's, the most expensive men's store in Charleston, and told the consultant I needed something that said, successful businessman, not service industry. He understood immediately. I walked out 2 hours later with a charcoal gray suit that fit like it had been painted on, an Italian silk tie, and shoes that cost more than I usually spent on a month's groceries. When I looked at myself in the mirror at home that evening, I barely recognized the man staring back. I looked like someone who belonged at a country club, someone whose daughter might not be ashamed to introduce to her wealthy in-laws. Funny how clothes could change perception. That night, I sat in my office at the restaurant, one last time before the wedding. The photos on my wall seemed to watch me, Rebecca through the years, happy and innocent, and mine. Tomorrow, I'd walk into this building not as the doting father I'd always been, but as something else. The owner, the boss, the man in control. Tracy Holmes had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that because I worked in restaurants, I was just labor, just staff, just someone to look down on. He had no idea I owned one of Charleston's most successful wedding venues, that I'd built a business worth millions, that I had the power to let his perfect day proceed, or shut it down with one word. And tomorrow, he was going to find out. I pulled up the security guard contract on my computer. Michael and David, 2 professionals I'd used before. Good guys, reliable. They'd follow instructions. I typed out an email to Carla. Make sure Michael and David understand they work for me. Not the clients, me. Her response came back immediately. Already done. They know the situation. They're on your side. I smiled and closed the laptop. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. The morning of May 3rd arrived with clear blue skies, the kind of perfect Charleston weather that wedding planners dream about. I stood in my bedroom, adjusting my new tie in the mirror, and barely recognized the man looking back at me. The suit transformed me. The charcoal gray fabric fit perfectly across my shoulders. The Italian silk tie caught the light just right. And the shoes, well, they were almost uncomfortable in their newness, but they completed the picture. I looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs, someone whose daughter might actually be proud to introduce to her wealthy in-laws. Funny how a few $1,000s of fabric could change perception so completely. I checked my watch. 2 o'clock. The ceremony was set for 4, which meant guests would start arriving around 3:30. I needed to time this perfectly. My phone buzzed. A text from Carla. Everything's ready. Staff briefed. Security in position. They know the situation. I smiled. Carla had outdone herself. According to her updates over the past week, the restaurant looked spectacular. Premium magnolias and marsh grass arrangements, our signature combination, the best champagne in our cellar, a menu that would make any food critic weep with joy, $45,000 worth of perfection, my gift to Rebecca, whether she knew it or not. Another text came through, this time from Philip Hunter, my lawyer. Trust documents filed and recorded. Everything's locked tight. Good luck today. Good luck? I'd need more than luck. I'd need timing, composure, and just the right amount at a theater. I drove to Magnolia and Marsh, slowly, deliberately, taking King Street instead of my usual route. I wanted to see Charleston at its best. The historic buildings, the tourists with their cameras, the horse-drawn carriages clopping past. This city had been good to me. I'd arrived here 25 years ago with nothing but culinary school debt and determination. Now I owned one of its premier wedding venues, and my daughter was ashamed of that achievement. The irony still tasted bitter. I parked across the street from the restaurant at exactly 2:15. Not in my usual spot in the back lot. That would have tipped off anyone paying attention. No, I parked right out front, where every arriving guest would see me step out of my car. The building looked magnificent. White fabric draped across the entrance, magnolia blooms everywhere, and through the tall windows I could see the interior, transformed into something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers sparkled. Tables glowed with candlelight even in the afternoon sun. Carla had followed my instructions to the letter. Make it perfect. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the preparations through the window. Staff members I'd worked with for years moved efficiently through their tasks, setting final place cards, adjusting flower arrangements, testing the sound system. They all knew what was about to happen. Carla had briefed them carefully, and to their credit, not one had breathed a word to the clients. Loyalty. That's what you got when you treated people with respect, paid them fairly, and built something together over years of hard work. Tracy Holmes was about to learn what happened when you underestimated people. At 2:30, I saw them arrive. Michael and David, the security guards, pulled up in their black SUV and took positions flanking the entrance. Both were former military, professional, calm, exactly the kind of people you'd want managing crowd control at a high-end event. They'd also worked for me half a dozen times over the past 3 years. They knew exactly who signed their checks. I watched Michael pull out a clipboard, the guest list presumably. David said something that made Michael laugh, then shake his head. Even from across the street, I could read their body language. They were not comfortable with their assignment today. Good. Uncomfortable people made mistakes, and I needed them to follow their instincts when the moment came. At 2:45, the first guests started arriving. Tracy's people, I assumed, based on the expensive cars and the air of casual wealth that surrounded them. Women in designer dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Men in suits that probably came from the same store where I'd bought mine, though they wore theirs with the unconscious ease of people who'd never known any other dress code. Old money. Tracy's world. None of them knew they were walking into my restaurant. My house. My rules. At 3 o'clock, I saw Tracy himself arrive, looking sharp in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my suit. He was directing traffic like a general commanding troops, telling guests where to park, greeting people with that shark smile I'd come to despise, playing the role of gracious host. In my restaurant, I felt that cold calm settle over me again, the same feeling I'd had in my office when Carla first told me about the booking. Anger was there, sure, burning somewhere deep in my chest, but it was controlled now, focused. At 3:15, Pastor Thomas arrived. I saw him pause at the entrance, speaking briefly with Michael and David. Even from this distance, I could see the concern on his face. Thomas was a good man. He'd probably spent the past week worrying about this situation, about his role in it. I'd told him not to worry, that everything would work out. I hoped I was right. At 3:30, I watched a limousine pull up. The driver got out, walked around, opened the rear door, and there she was, Rebecca. Even from across the street, even through my anger and hurt, I had to admit she looked beautiful. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, probably designer, probably another fortune spent. Her hair was swept up, her makeup flawless. She looked like a bride from a magazine cover. She also looked terrified. I watched her hesitate before stepping out of the car, watched her take a deep breath, square her shoulders, paste on a smile, watched her transform herself into the performance Tracy required. For just a moment, I saw the girl I'd raised, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken hearts, believing I could fix anything. Then Tracy appeared, took her arm, and that girl vanished behind the mask. I checked my watch. 3:45. 15 minutes until the ceremony began. Time to crash my daughter's wedding. I stepped out of my car and crossed the street. The new shoes clicked sharply on the pavement, a sound that announced arrival, authority, intention. I walked straight toward the entrance, my pace measured, my expression calm. Michael saw me first. His eyes widened slightly, then he glanced at David. Some silent communication passed between them. I kept walking. David stepped forward, his hand raised in a polite but firm gesture. "Excuse me, sir, but this is a private event. I'm going to need to see your invitation." "I don't have an invitation," I said pleasantly, "but I do have this." I pulled out my keys, the heavy brass keyring with the Magnolia and Marsh logo prominently displayed. "Let them hang in the air between us for a moment." Michael's face did something complicated. Surprise, realization, then something that looked almost like relief. "Mr. Coleman?" "That's right," I smiled. "Dennis Coleman, owner of this establishment." David looked at his clipboard, then at me, then at Michael. "Sir, we have explicit instructions that you're not allowed—" "I know exactly what your instructions say," I interrupted gently. "Dennis Coleman is not to be permitted entry." I'm guessing those instructions came from the bride or groom. Both men nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Gentlemen, here's the situation." I kept my voice calm, reasonable. "I own this building. I own everything in it. Every table, every chair, every flower arrangement your clients paid $45,000 to rent. Now, I could make this difficult for everyone. I could exercise my property rights and shut this whole thing down. Or—" I paused, letting that sink in. "You could step aside and let me enter my own restaurant." Michael and David looked at each other. The absurdity of the situation was written all over their faces. They'd been hired to keep the owner out of his own property. "Mr. Coleman," Michael said slowly, "we're just doing our job. I know, and I respect that. But your job is to manage the guest list, not to bar the property owner from his own establishment. So the question is, are you going to try to physically prevent me from entering my restaurant? Because that would be a mistake for everyone involved." Another long look between them. Then David lowered his clipboard and stepped aside. "We'll inform the clients that you've arrived," Michael said quietly. "You do that," I said, and walked through the door of my restaurant. The interior of Magnolia and Marsh had been transformed into something spectacular. I'd seen hundreds of weddings here over the years, but Carla had outdone herself this time. Soft, golden light from the chandeliers mixed with natural sunlight streaming through the tall windows. White fabric draped elegantly from the ceiling. The magnolia arrangements filled the air with their distinctive scent. It was perfect, exactly the kind of setting any father would dream of for his daughter's wedding. If he'd been invited? Guests were already seated in neat rows facing the makeshift altar, where Pastor Thomas stood, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The string quartet was playing something classical and romantic. Everyone was dressed to the nines, champagne glasses already in hands, the murmur of polite conversation filling the space. I stood just inside the entrance, taking it all in. Carla spotted me immediately. She'd been watching for my arrival. She walked over with perfect professional composure, though I caught the slight gleam in her eye. "Mr. Coleman," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "how wonderful that you could join us." Several heads turned. A woman in an enormous hat whispered something to her companion. A man in a tuxedo frowned, trying to place me. "Carla," I replied with equal volume, "everything looks spectacular. Your best work yet." "Only the finest for our clients, sir, as always." She smiled, and there was mischief in it. More heads were turning now. The whispers were spreading. Someone said, "Who is that?" Someone else responded, "I think that's the owner." And then, like a shark sensing blood in the water, Tracy appeared. He came at me fast, his face a study in barely controlled fury. The gracious host mask had slipped, revealing something harder underneath. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold, and his expensive tuxedo suddenly looked like armor. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, stopping just short of actually grabbing my arm. "You weren't invited. You have no right—" "Actually, Tracy," I said calmly, "I have every right. This is my restaurant." He blinked. Once. Twice. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. It was like watching a computer trying to process an impossible equation. "You're... what?" "My restaurant, Magnolia and Marsh. I own it." I gestured around us. "That chandelier? Mine. Those tables? Mine. The kitchen where your reception dinner is being prepared? Mine. You're standing in my establishment." The color drained from Tracy's face. It was fascinating to watch, like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood out. His skin went from a healthy tan to something approaching gray. His hands, which had been balled into fists at his sides, opened and closed spasmodically. That's not..." He couldn't seem to form complete sentences. "Rebecca never said... I thought you were just..." "Just what, Tracy? Just a cook? Just service industry? Just not important enough to mention?" I kept my voice pleasant, conversational, but let the steel show through. "Rebecca has known about my business for years. She grew up in this building, but I suppose when you're ashamed of your father, you don't brag about his accomplishments." Behind Tracy, more guests had noticed the commotion. The whispers were getting louder. Someone pulled out a phone. Pastor Thomas had abandoned his position at the altar and was moving toward us, his face creased with concern. "You need to leave," Tracy said, but his voice had lost its authority. He sounded like a child demanding something he knew he wouldn't get. "This is my wedding. Mine and Rebecca's. We paid for this venue. You can't..." "I can't what?" I interrupted. "I can't enter my own property? I can't walk through the business I built from scratch 15 years ago? Tracy, you paid me $45,000 to rent this space for 6 hours. That doesn't make it yours. It makes you a client. And as the owner, I have the absolute right to be here." His face was doing something interesting now. The gray had been replaced by splotches of red on his cheeks. His mouth kept opening and closing, like he was trying out different responses and rejecting them all. His eyes darted around the room, looking for help, for escape, for something that would make this situation make sense. It was deeply satisfying to watch. "Where's Rebecca?" I asked. "I think we should have a family conversation, the three of us." "She's in the bridal suite," Carla said helpfully, "getting final touch-ups. I can fetch her if you'd like, Mr. Coleman." "That won't be necessary," said a small voice from the hallway. Rebecca emerged from the back corridor, still in her magnificent wedding dress, her makeup artist trailing behind her, looking confused. My daughter's face was the color of fresh snow. Her eyes were huge, rimmed with what I knew was waterproof mascara. Probably a good investment, given what was about to happen. She stopped about 10 feet away from me, one hand clutching her bouquet so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white through the lace of her gloves. "Dad!" It came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that familiar ache in my chest. My little girl, my daughter who used to help me test new recipes, who dreamed of culinary school, who'd once told me I was her hero. "What am I doing here?" I repeated softly. "Rebecca, this is my restaurant. I bought this building. I renovated it. I turned it into one of Charleston's premier wedding venues. You know that. You've known that since you were 12 years old. Her eyes dropped to the floor. You booked my restaurant for your wedding, I continued. You paid my company $45,000. Money I would have gladly given you as a gift if you'd asked. You hired security to keep me out, and you didn't tell your fiancé that his future father-in-law owns the venue he's getting married in. Rebecca's voice cracked. I didn't think. No, I agreed. You didn't think. Or maybe you did, and you were just too ashamed to admit that your father, the man who paid for your culinary school education, who supported every dream you ever had, wasn't good enough for your new life. A tear rolled down her cheek, leaving a track through her perfect makeup. Behind her I could see guests openly staring now. The string quartet had stopped playing. The entire room had gone silent, watching this family drama unfold. Tracy finally found his voice again. This is outrageous. You're disrupting our wedding. I'll sue you for... I turned to him slowly. For what? Entering my own property? Good luck with that. In fact, speaking of lawsuits, we should talk about yours. His face went from red to white again. Interesting how quickly he cycled through colors. What are you talking about? But his voice wavered. I pulled a folder from inside my jacket, the documents Roger Stewart had compiled for me. 3 lawsuits from clients who lost significant money following your investment advice. 2 previous engagements to young women with money. Both ended in quiet settlements. A pattern of financial predation that your family has been covering up for years. Rebecca made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Tracy's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked like a fish someone had just pulled from water, gasping for air that wouldn't come. His hands started to shake slightly. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Once, twice. Those are lies, he finally managed. Baseless accusations from a licensed private investigator, I interrupted, with documentation, court records, settlement agreements. All very real, Tracy. All very damning. He took a step backward, nearly stumbling. His perfectly styled hair had fallen slightly forward. A bead of sweat appeared at his temple. The gracious, confident host was gone. What remained was something much smaller, much more desperate. Rebecca, he said, turning to her, don't listen to him. He's just trying to... But Rebecca was looking at me, and in her eyes I finally saw something break. The mask cracked. The performance ended. Is it true? She whispered. Dad, is it true? About the lawsuits? Every word, I said gently. I had it all verified. Tracy here has been living off his family's money and reputation for years, targeting young women he thinks have access to wealth. And I'm guessing he thought you did too. Her bouquet fell to the floor. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the guests who'd been whispering stopped. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments. Someone's champagne glass hit the floor, the crystal shattering with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. Rebecca's bouquet lay where it had fallen. White roses scattered across the polished hardwood floor of my restaurant. I watched my daughter's face cycle through emotions. Shock, disbelief, fear, and finally something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Her perfectly applied makeup was starting to run, mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark rivers. Dad, she whispered, what have you done? What have I done? I repeated softly. Rebecca, I haven't done anything except show up at my own business. Everything else, the booking, the security, the exclusion, that was all you and Tracy. I turned to address the room, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. I'm Dennis Coleman, owner of Magnolia and Marsh. This is my restaurant. Has been for 15 years. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tracy's mother, Loretta Holmes, a woman dripping in pearls and privilege, stepped forward. Her husband Martin followed, his face a mask of confused concern. Tracy? Loretta's voice was sharp, aristocratic. What is he talking about? This man owns the venue? Tracy's face had gone a mottled red and white, like a chameleon that couldn't decide which color to settle on. Mother, I can explain. I'd love to hear that explanation, I said pleasantly, because from where I'm standing, you booked my restaurant for your wedding, paid my company $45,000, hired security to keep me out, and never once asked my daughter whose building you were getting married in. Martin Holmes, old Charleston money, the kind that opened doors and closed others, looked at Tracy with something approaching disgust. You didn't know this was her father's establishment? Rebecca never mentioned, Tracy started. I never mentioned it, Rebecca said, her voice breaking, because I was ashamed. The words hung in the air like smoke. Several guests gasped. I saw Tracy's expression shift, suddenly calculating, trying to salvage something from this disaster. But I wasn't done. Ashamed, I repeated, and I let all the hurt, all the months of subtle dismissal, all the pain of her silence color my voice. My daughter was so ashamed of her father's work that she hid it from her fiancé. She let him think I was just, what, a cook, a laborer, someone not worth inviting to her wedding? It wasn't like that, Rebecca protested weakly. Then how was it? I kept my tone gentle but firm. You booked my restaurant, the business I built from nothing, that paid for your culinary school education, and you paid full price rather than telling me you were getting married. You hired security, with specific instructions to keep me out. How exactly was it, Rebecca? Tracy seized on what he probably thought was an opportunity. This is harassment, he announced loudly. You're disrupting a private event? On my property, I interrupted, which brings me to something else. I pulled out the folder again, extracting a specific document. I had my lawyer draw up some paperwork this week, a trust. Everything I own, this restaurant, all my assets, is now in a protected trust. Even if Rebecca remains my heir, she can't access it without my approval. And most importantly, I looked directly at Tracy. No debts or legal judgments against family members can touch these assets. Tracy's face went from mottled to pure white. He knew. He knew exactly what I was implying. You did this to protect her from me, he said flatly. I did this, I corrected, to protect her from predators, from men who marry women for their money, from financial consultants with 3 outstanding lawsuits and a pattern of targeting young women with perceived wealth. The crowd erupted. Guests were talking over each other now, no longer trying to be polite or discreet. I saw phones coming out, people recording, texting, undoubtedly spreading this scandal through Charleston's social circles at the speed of light. Loretta Holmes looked like she might faint. Tracy, these accusations are documented, I said, and my voice cut through the noise. Court records, settlement agreements, all obtained legally by a licensed private investigator. Your son has been living off the Holmes name while losing other people's money. And when his clients sued, your family settled quietly to protect the family reputation. Martin Holmes's face had gone hard as stone. He looked at his son like he was seeing him clearly for the first time, and he didn't like what he saw. Is this true? Martin's voice was ice. Tracy opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Father, those lawsuits were misunderstandings. Bad market timing. Not my fault. 3 lawsuits aren't coincidence, I said, and 2 previous engagements to wealthy women that ended in settlements aren't bad luck. That's a pattern, Tracy. That's predation. Rebecca made a small sound, something between a sob and a gasp. She was looking at Tracy like she'd never seen him before, like the man she thought she knew was dissolving in front of her eyes, revealing something much uglier underneath. Becca, Tracy said, turning to her, his voice suddenly desperate, pleading. Don't listen to him. He's just trying to manipulate you. He can't stand that you're moving on with your life. Moving on with my life? Rebecca's voice was stronger now, anger creeping in. Tracy, did you know about this restaurant? Did you know my father owned it? You never told me? Tracy shot back. You always said he worked in restaurants. You never said he owned. I shouldn't have had to tell you. Rebecca's voice broke. You should have cared enough to ask, to want to know about my family, about where I came from. I watched my daughter's face transform. The mask Tracy had helped her build, the performance of being someone better than her origins, was cracking, falling away piece by piece, and underneath I could see the girl I'd raised, angry, hurt, but real. Rebecca, I said softly, and she looked at me with eyes full of tears. You don't have to decide anything right now, but you should know I've never been ashamed of you. Not once, not ever. The only question is whether you're ashamed of me. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Tracy, at his desperate face, at the expensive tuxedo and the shark smile that had finally failed him. I need to think, she said, her voice barely audible. I need I can't do this right now. She gathered her wedding dress in her hands and walked toward the back corridor, toward the bridal suite, leaving a trail of rose petals in her wake. The wedding was over, and I was pretty sure the engagement was too. Tracy watched Rebecca disappear down the corridor, and something in his expression shifted. The desperation morphed into something harder, uglier. This was a man who wasn't used to losing, and he wasn't going down without a fight. "You think you're so clever," he said, turning back to me. His voice had lost its polish, revealing something raw underneath. "You think you've won? You've just destroyed your daughter's happiness. She'll never forgive you for humiliating her like this." "I think she'll forgive me faster than she'll forgive you for lying to her," I replied calmly. Tracy's jaw clenched. I could see him thinking, calculating. Then he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer," he announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "We had a signed contract for this venue. You're in breach. I'll sue you for everything you have." I smiled. I couldn't help it. "Call your lawyer, Tracy. I'd be happy to explain to a judge how you attempted to bar the property owner from his own establishment. I'm sure that'll go well for you. You can't just kick us out." "I haven't kicked anyone out. You're welcome to stay. Have your ceremony. I'll even have my staff serve the meal you ordered. All I did was walk through my own front door." I paused. Though I have to say, getting married without a bride might be challenging. Loretta Holmes had recovered from her initial shock and now stepped forward, her face pinched with aristocratic fury. "Mr. Coleman, I don't know what kind of establishment you think you're running, but the Holmes family will not be associated with this circus." "Then perhaps," I suggested mildly, "you should have raised your son to be honest about his financial failures instead of covering them up." Her face went red. "How dare you?" "Mother," Martin Holmes said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. He'd been watching this whole exchange with the calculating eye of someone who knew exactly how scandals spread through Charleston society. "We're leaving. But Martin—" "Now, Loretta." He turned to Tracy, and there was no warmth in his expression. "You and I will have a very long conversation about those lawsuits, and about your pattern of targeting women with money. At home. Privately." Tracy's face crumbled. Without his father's protection, without the Holmes family money and reputation to shield him, he was nothing. Just another failed financial consultant with a trail of lawsuits and broken engagements. "Fine," Tracy spat. "Fine. But this isn't over, Coleman. You've made an enemy today." "I made an enemy 6 months ago," I corrected, "when you decided my daughter wasn't good enough to have a father at her wedding. Today I just leveled the playing field." Martin Holmes took his son by the arm, firmly, like handling a child who'd misbehaved, and started steering him toward the exit. Loretta followed, her head high, despite the humiliation, playing her part to the end. As they left, the room erupted into conversation again. Guests were gathering their things, some looking scandalized, others fascinated by the drama they'd just witnessed. A few were clearly on their phones, already spreading the story. Pastor Thomas approached me, his face creased with concern. "Dennis, that took courage." "Or stupidity," I said. "I'm not entirely sure which yet." "She'll come around," Thomas said. "Rebecca's a smart girl. Once she processes everything, once she really looks at what Tracy was—" "I hope you're right." Carla materialized at my elbow, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal amusement. "Well, that was more dramatic than our usual weddings." "Sorry about that." "Are you kidding? I haven't had this much fun at work in years." She glanced toward the corridor where Rebecca had disappeared. "You want me to check on her?" "Give her a few minutes. She needs to think." The guests were filing out now, creating a steady stream toward the exits. I heard fragments of conversation as they passed. "Can you believe? Always knew Tracy was— that poor girl." Poor girl. That's what they thought. Poor Rebecca, caught between her social climbing fiancé and her embarrassing father. They had it backwards. After about 20 minutes, the restaurant had mostly cleared. Just a few stragglers remained, and my staff was already beginning the cleanup process, though they kept glancing at me, clearly dying to ask questions. I was standing by one of the windows, looking out at King Street, when I heard footsteps behind me. Quiet, hesitant. "Dad?" I turned. Rebecca stood there, still in her wedding dress, but she'd taken off the veil and wiped away most of the smeared makeup. She looked younger without it, more like herself. I'm here, sweetheart. She walked toward me slowly, like she wasn't quite sure of her reception. When she was a few feet away, she stopped. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to be honest. Always. Did you plan this? Coming here today, revealing everything in front of everyone? Was this all calculated? I considered lying, considered softening it, but she'd asked for honesty. Yes, I said. I planned it. After you told me I wasn't invited to your wedding, after I found out you'd booked my restaurant and hired security to keep me out, yes, I planned to show up, to make you and Tracy face what you'd done. She nodded slowly. And the information about Tracy? The lawsuits? All true, verified by a private investigator. I wouldn't have said it if I couldn't prove it. Why didn't you just tell me privately? Why do it here in front of everyone? Would you have believed me, I asked gently, if I'd come to you privately with these accusations about Tracy? Would you have listened? Or would you have thought I was just a jealous father who couldn't accept your new life? She looked away, and that was answer enough. You embarrassed me, she said, but there was less conviction in it now. In front of everyone I wanted to impress. You embarrassed yourself, I replied, when you decided I wasn't good enough to be part of your life, when you paid my company $45,000, rather than tell me you were getting married, when you hired security to keep your own father out of his own business. Her face crumpled. I was so stupid. No, I said firmly. You were influenced by someone who wanted to separate you from anyone who might see through him. That's what predators do, Rebecca. They isolate their targets. I really thought... She stopped, swallowed hard. I really thought he loved me. Maybe part of him did, but he also saw dollar signs. He thought you had access to money through me. But you don't have money. You have the restaurant, which is worth almost $3 million, I pointed out. That's what he was after. That's why he wanted me out of the picture before the wedding. Once you were married, he'd have found a way to get his hands on it. She was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. How do you know all this? Because I've spent 15 years building a business, Rebecca. I know how to read people. I know when someone sees value instead of human beings. I paused. And because I'm your father, I'll always protect you, even when you don't think you need protecting, even when you're ashamed of me. I'm not... She stopped, reconsidered. I was ashamed. Tracy made it seem like you were less, like what you did wasn't important. And I believed him because I wanted to believe I could be someone different, someone better. You were always someone better, I said. You just forgot. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive. You're my daughter. That doesn't change. I held out my arms. Come here. She crossed the distance between us in 2 steps and buried her face in my shoulder, crying in earnest now. I held her while she sobbed, feeling her wedding dress crumple between us, not caring about the expensive fabric or the smeared makeup staining my suit. What do I do now? She asked when she finally pulled back. Now? I smiled. Now you take off that dress, go home, and figure out who you really want to be. Not who Tracy wanted you to be. Not who you think Charleston society expects. Just you. She nodded, wiping her eyes. And us? We're fine, I assured her. We'll always be fine. She hugged me again, fierce and quick, then headed back toward the bridal suite to change. I stood alone in my restaurant, surrounded by the remnants of a wedding that never happened, and felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight and painful for months. My daughter was back, not all the way, not yet, but she was on her way home. The next few weeks were, as Rebecca had predicted, difficult, but not in the way she'd meant. I watched my daughter grapple with the reality of what Tracy had been. She did her own research, looked up the court cases, spoke to one of his previous fiancés, who'd signed an NDA but was willing to talk off the record. Each discovery hit her like a fresh blow. I was so stupid, she said to me one evening about a week after the failed wedding. We were sitting in my living room, the same room where she'd announced her engagement what felt like a lifetime ago. You weren't stupid, I corrected. You were manipulated by someone who's very good at manipulation. That's what predators do. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. How did you see through him so quickly? Because I've spent my whole life watching people. In restaurants, you learn to read body language, tone, what people really mean versus what they say. I paused. And because I'm your father, I was looking at him differently than you were. I really thought he loved me. Maybe he thought he did too. But love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't make you ashamed of where you came from. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I was ashamed, wasn't I? Of you, of the restaurant, of everything I should have been proud of. Yes, I said gently. You were. Can we fix this? We're already fixing it, I assured her, just by having this conversation. But I knew there was more work to be done. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. About 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Rebecca showed up at the restaurant on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office going over supplier invoices when Carla knocked on my door. You have a visitor, she said, and something in her expression told me who it was. Rebecca stood in my office doorway looking uncertain. She was dressed casually, jeans and a simple shirt, and without the expensive makeup and styled hair from her Tracy days, she looked more like herself. Can I come in? She asked. Always. She sat down across from my desk, her hands folded in her lap. I've been thinking a lot over the past few weeks about what I want, who I want to be. I waited. I realized something. She looked up at me. I never thanked you for culinary school, for supporting my dreams, for building this, she gestured around us, this incredible business, and never once making me feel like I owed you anything. You don't owe me anything, Rebecca. You're my daughter. Supporting you is what parents do. But I do owe you something, she insisted. I owe you an apology, not just words. A real one. An apology that means something. What did you have in mind? I want to work here, she said in a rush, at Magnolia and Marsh. Not as the owner's daughter, not with special treatment. I want to start at the bottom. Hostess, waitress, kitchen help, whatever you need. I want to learn this business the way you built it, from the ground up. I studied her face, looking for any sign that this was another performance, but all I saw was sincerity, and maybe a little fear that I'd say no. It's hard work, I warned. Long hours, difficult customers. No special treatment means no special treatment. I know. You'd have to start Friday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. shift, minimum wage plus tips. No benefits until you've been here 90 days. That's perfect. I allowed myself a small smile. Then welcome to Magnolia and Marsh, Miss Coleman. Report to Carla on Friday morning. She'll show you the ropes. Rebecca's face transformed. Relief, gratitude, hope, all flickering across her features. Thank you, Dad. You won't regret this. I know I won't, I said. You're going to be great. She stood up to leave, then hesitated at the door. Dad, I really am sorry for everything. I know, sweetheart, and I forgive you. I forgave you the moment you walked away from Tracy. The tears came then, but they were good tears. Healing tears. Now get out of here before I make you start working today, I said, injecting some humor into my voice. You've got 3 days to prepare for the hardest job you've ever had. She laughed through her tears and left. Carla appeared in my doorway moments later. So she's joining us? She is. Should I go easy on her? Absolutely not, I said firmly. Treat her exactly like you'd treat any new hire. If she can't cut it, she doesn't stay. The business comes first. Carla grinned. You know I'm going to work her harder than anyone else, right? Make sure she really earns her place? I'm counting on it. Friday arrived. I deliberately stayed in my office for most of Rebecca's first day, letting Carla handle the training. But around the dinner rush, I ventured out to observe. My daughter was in the weeds, completely overwhelmed. She'd just delivered the wrong order to a table, spilled water on another, and I could see the frustration and exhaustion written all over her face. But she wasn't giving up. She apologized profusely, fixed her mistakes, and kept moving. When a particularly difficult customer berated her for being slow, I watched her take a deep breath, smile professionally, and handle it with grace. She caught my eye across the restaurant. For a moment, I thought she might expect me to step in to make it easier. I just raised an eyebrow and went back to my office. She was on her own, just like I'd been when I started in this business 30 years ago. That's how you learn. That's how you earn respect. And watching her stumble, recover, and push through, that was more satisfying than any revenge I'd taken on Tracy Holmes could ever be. My daughter was finding her way back to herself. The The real Rebecca. The one who wasn't afraid of hard work. The one who didn't need designer clothes and country club connections to feel valuable. She was coming home. 3 months passed. I stood in my usual spot at the back of the restaurant's main dining room, watching the evening service unfold. It was a Saturday night, our busiest time, and the place was packed. Rebecca moved through the tables with practiced efficiency now. She'd shed the uncertainty of those early weeks, the hesitation, the fear of making mistakes. Her movements were confident, her smile genuine as she chatted with guests about the menu. She was wearing the standard server uniform, black pants, white shirt, the Magnolia and Marsh apron, and she wore it with pride. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry, just honest work, honestly done. Table 12 wants to compliment the chef, one of the other servers told her as I watched. They said the low country boil was the best they've ever had. Rebecca beamed. That's actually my recipe, she said. Well, my version of Dad's recipe. I'll go thank them. I felt something warm settle in my chest. She'd been experimenting in the kitchen on her days off, working with our head chef to develop new dishes. Her culinary school education was finally being put to use. Not to impress Charleston society, but to feed real people, real food. Carla appeared at my elbow. She's doing well. She is, I agreed. You thinking about making her assistant manager? Not yet. Let her earn it. Fair enough. Carla paused. You heard about Tracy? I raised an eyebrow. What about him? His parents cut him off, froze his trust fund pending a full audit of his financial activities. Apparently, those 3 lawsuits were just the beginning. The private investigator you hired? His report got leaked somehow. I kept my expression neutral. Somehow, Carla smirked. Anyway, word is Tracy left Charleston. Somewhere out west. His reputation here is toast. Good, I said simply. He won't be able to hurt anyone else the way he tried to hurt Rebecca. Through the window, I could see King Street, bustling with tourists and locals. Charleston was moving on with its life, as it always did. The scandal of the wedding that never happened had become just another story in the city's long history of dramatic social events. But for me, for Rebecca, it had been something more. A turning point, a reckoning. Rebecca finished with table 12 and headed toward the kitchen. As she passed me, she paused. How am I doing, boss? You tell me, I said. How do you think you're doing? She considered the question seriously. I think I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I should be doing. And I think... She looked around at the restaurant, at the guests, at the life happening around us. I think I'm happy. Really happy. For the first time in a long time. Then you're doing perfectly. She squeezed my arm, a quick gesture of affection, and continued to the kitchen. I watched her go, remembering the girl who'd stood in my living room 3 months ago, cold and distant, announcing her wedding to a man who saw her as a bank account. Remembering the woman in the wedding dress, mascara streaming down her face, choosing between her father and the lie she'd been living. She'd made the right choice, and now she was building something real, something that couldn't be bought or borrowed, or based on someone else's expectations. She was building herself. The evening wore on. Around 10 o'clock, after the dinner rush had calmed, I found Rebecca in the back, rolling silverware for tomorrow's lunch service. It was grunt work, the kind of thing she would have sneered at back in her Tracy days. Now she was humming while she did it. Got a minute? I asked. She looked up. Always. What's up? I sat down across from her. I've been thinking. You've been here 3 months. You've worked hard, learned fast, never complained. Carla says you're one of her best servers. Carla said that. Rebecca looked pleased and surprised. Don't let it go to your head. But yes, I paused. I think it's time we talked about your future here. What you want from this job, where you see yourself going. Rebecca set down the silverware she'd been rolling. I want to learn everything. Front of house, back of house, management, suppliers, everything. I want to understand this business the way you do. That takes years. I know. I'm prepared for that. And you're not doing this just to make up for what happened with Tracy? She met my eyes. No, I'm doing this because I finally figured out who I am. And this, she gestured around us, this is where I belong. Not in some country club, not trying to impress people who measure worth by bank accounts. Here, building something real with my own hands. I nodded slowly. Then we'll make it happen. But Rebecca? It's still going to be hard. I'm still going to push you. Still going to expect excellence. I wouldn't want it any other way. We sat there for a moment in comfortable silence. Then Rebecca said, "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself." "You're my daughter," I said simply. "That never changes. Not ever." She smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in months before Tracy left the picture. "I love you. I love you too, sweetheart." She went back to rolling silverware, and I went back to my office. But I paused at the door, looking back at the restaurant one more time. This was what victory looked like. Not the public humiliation of Tracy Holmes, though that had been satisfying. Not the shocked faces of Charleston society when they learned the truth. Not even the vindication of proving I'd built something valuable. No. Victory looked like my daughter, tired from an honest day's work, humming while she rolled silverware in the restaurant her father built. Victory looked like family, restored. Victory looked like coming home. Outside, Charleston settled into its evening rhythms. Inside Magnolia and Marsh, the work continued, and I knew with absolute certainty that everything was exactly as it should be. My restaurant, my business, my legacy, and most importantly, my daughter, back where she belonged. The revenge had been sweet, yes, but this was everything. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.